Today I will show you an action, adventure, sci-fi film from 2021, titled Venom. Let there be carnage. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. An orphanage is shown at the start of the movie. Two key characters from the film are depicted here. Cletus Cassidy was one, and Francis Barrison was the other. They were sitting in their respective rooms. This place resembled a ward of a mental institution. Francis is depicted as terrified in this scene. Cletus inquires as to what the doctor has said to her. Francis claims that my mutation is accelerating. I'm gradually evolving into a powerful mutant. I'm scared because some people were planning to subject her to a large experiment. Cletus reassures her, don't worry, everything will be fine. He claims that they are unable to conduct any experiments on you. You are their single hope and they will let you move far from them. Meanwhile, some people arrive and forcefully take Francis with them. Cletus becomes furious seeing this. He becomes out of control. They were taking Francis in a police car on another side. Cletus was striking his hand on the window in anger. They take Francis to a secret location. On the way, Francis, due to her sonic power, she tries to run from there. Francis has the vocal powers from which she can break heavy glass or windows. Due to the vocal powers of Francis, the van tilts. It also affects the police officers there. The police officers, being panicked, shoot at Francis's eye. Francis falls out of the car due to it. The police think maybe she is dead, but she was still alive. Later, they take Francis into an asylum. A doctor is shown performing different experiments on Francis. Meanwhile, a ward boy is shown giving the newspaper to Francis. Cletus was given a death sentence, according to the newspaper. Actually, Cletus Cassidy was a massive serial killer. His death sentence was postponed due to a lack of evidence. The surprising thing is Eddie has printed this news. Here, the doctor says to Francis, people like Cletus should be death sentenced. The detective is shown in the next scene. He was talking to Eddie. Eddie says to the detective, I have no concern with Cletus. The detective says he just wants to talk to you. Eddie asks after hearing this, what is so special in me that he wants to talk to me? The detective says there must be talks related to the dead body. He wanted to share with you. You should talk to him for once. Venom is shown coming out of Eddie's body and about to eat the detective. Meanwhile, Eddie stops Venom. Later, Eddie and Venom go to the washroom. Going inside, they start talking. A lady there and a detective were listening to them. Venom says to Eddie, we should protect the city going there. We are just talking sitting here. Venom is insulting Eddie. Venom also annoys him, but Eddie says, Venom, you should respect me. I am your host, so at least respect me. After it, Eddie means Venom gets ready to meet Cletus. Eddie goes to jail to meet Cletus. They start talking. Eddie asks Cletus, what do you want from me? Why did you call me here? Cletus says, you have to print news for the sake of my fans. In return, I will give you an exclusive interview. In this interview, I'll tell you my secrets. What is the secret behind the murders I have done? Where are those dead bodies? Eddie asks him, why did you choose me for this task? Cletus replies, because I like you. Cletus asks him to print the news that Francis has read a few days ago. Eddie was leaving, but Cletus stops him. He diverts his attention to the shapes made on the wall. There's some messages were also written. Some graves were also made there as well. Seeing them, Eddie moves forward from there. While leaving, Cletus says to Eddie, please don't forget me. Eddie comes out and the detective asks, what did Cletus say to you? Eddie says, while hiding the conversation, he hasn't said anything to me yet. My inquiry is still continuing on him. These things will take time. Eddie leaves while sitting on his bike. Reaching home, Venom helps Eddie to decode everything made on the wall. Venom also tells him a location at the beach. The location where Cletus has hidden all the dead bodies. The next day, many police officer reaches the location. They find many dead bodies ended by Cletus. Later, the reporters start talking to Eddie. They ask him, do you become a friend of Cletus? He has told you all the secrets. The secret where he kept the dead bodies of the people whom he murdered. Only you have met him yet. We got this information after your meeting with him. The detective becomes furious seeing the live telecast of the interview, because Eddie hasn't told him about this. He has kept it a secret. He was shocked to see this huge news. Due to getting all the evidence, Cletus was declared the death sentence. Because this news spread everywhere, Francis also gets this news. Francis becomes sad after knowing this. Cletus also feels like Eddie has deceived him. He blames Eddie for all this, because Eddie becomes famous due to this news. Venom says to Eddie, we will end the enemies together. He says, I am fed up with eating chickens. Now I am restless to eat the human flesh. Eddie says after hearing this, we are already stuck in Cletus's case. It is prudent not to take another risk. If anyone will die or miss, the FBI will suspect us. Now at this time, we can't invite any trouble. They start arguing due to it. Venom says ill about Eddie. Eddie again says, please respect me. Later, Eddie goes to meet a shopkeeper. He goes to a poultry farm. Reaching there, Venom starts eating chickens. After eating, they were leaving. Meanwhile, a gangster was teasing a lady on the way. He tries to run from there while snatching money from her. Eddie forbids Venom from remaining in this situation. Venom ignores Eddie and tries to eat the gangster. Eddie also requests Venom, don't do this. Venom leaves the gangster and they move forward. Suddenly, Eddie's friend Ann calls him. She calls Eddie to meet him. Eddie agrees to meet with her. Venom was also talking to Eddie when they meet, and also discovers Eddie is talking to Venom, and asks Eddie, is Venom is still with you? Eddie says no, Venom has died, and tells Eddie, now I am engaged. Eddie becomes emotional after this. Meanwhile, Ann asks Eddie, how are you? Venom, I know you are still inside Eddie, so please take care of Eddie. Eddie becomes surprised after hearing this and leaves for his house on his bike. Venom makes Eddie understand he shouldn't be sad for these small things, because we are made for huge tasks. Eddie says you can't understand my feeling because you don't love someone. The next day, Venom is shown cooking food for itself. Venom asks Eddie to take a healthy and strong breakfast, because Venom will not get anything until Eddie eats. A letter is shown received by them. This was by Cletus. Cletus was saying, Eddie, I have declared the death sentence because of you. Cletus also writes his old evil tasks like if I will not be born, who would end my grandmother, who would suffocate my mother by drowning her in the bathtub. It means Cletus hasn't spared his family. Cletus has also written, after all this my father has sent me to an orphanage. The kids beat me. I met Francis, who was a mutant having vocal powers. We build a good bonding and become friends. We liked each other. Now I want to meet you, Eddie, for the last time. Eddie agrees to meet with him. Later, Eddie is shown in jail for meeting him. Cletus tells Eddie, I wished for a family always. Eddie says yes. It has to happen after ending your mother and grandmother. Cletus says if I will be ended with death sentenced, you will be responsible for my death. He also says, Eddie, you are a disgrace to humanity. This was a trick of Cletus because he was trying to make Eddie furious. This was the reason Venom also becomes furious. It starts beating Cletus while coming out of Eddie's belly. Cletus was so clever, that's why he bites his hand. But the guard arrives and stops their fight. Cletus says to Eddie when he was leaving, I have tasted the blood before. Your blood is different. It is shown when Cletus bit Eddie, his symbiote's part left in Cletus. It is shown when Eddie reaches home, Venom apologizes to him. That I shouldn't do this. Eddie makes it understand you should control yourself. If you will end Cletus, the allegation of his death will be upon me. It would create a huge problem for me. Here, they again argue. They say ill to each other. One says, I'm bearing you, while the other says, I'm bearing you. Venom says to Eddie, you were a loser. I saved you and gave you a new identity. You get famous after Cletus's case. Hearing this, Eddie becomes enraged and orders Venom to leave. Venom also becomes furious because of it. It spreads destruction in the house. Finally, Venom leaves Eddie's body and leaves. It also breaks Eddie's bike while leaving. Cletus is shown in the next scene, who was declared death sentence, when they were about to end him with an injection. But due to the reaction in the body because of injection, the small piece of symbiote connects with Cletus's body. Gradually, a new symbiote produces. It was the Carnage. Meanwhile, Carnage comes in its full form. They get scared seeing it. They try to escape from there while screaming. Carnage is shown as massive, terrible, and powerful. Later, Carnage eats all the police officers. It releases the prisoners from there. Eddie is shown in the next scene watching the TV. He discovers Cletus has escaped from jail. Eddie becomes worried and surprised because of this. The detective comes to meet Eddie and calls Eddie responsible for this incident. Eddie says, no, I don't know anything about this. How Cletus has escaped from there. That's why you couldn't hold it against me. The detective says he just met you. Maybe there is your master plan to release him from there. Venom is shown changing the bodies one by one because it couldn't find a body that fitted. It moves into a party while possessing a girl. All people have worn different costumes. The environment was like a Halloween party. They all think Venom is also wearing a costume. It is looking smart in it. It was looking massive in size, so they start admiring it. Cletus is shown running while stealing a car. Carnage was talking to Cletus like Venom used to take to Eddie. It says there is only a symbiote that is Venom. We can rule the world if we will end Venom. Cletus says, firstly, I have to release my partner, Francis, because I love her so much. She should be with me. Carnage also agrees with him hearing this. Venom was enjoying the party while dancing, even it wins the competition. Venom also gives a speech there, but it was missing Eddie. Eddie reaches the orphanage where Cletus lived. CK plus FB was shown written on the wall. Eddie calls the detective and informs him about this. I am in the orphanage where Cletus lived. The detective asks him the meaning of FB. Eddie tells him it means Francis Barrison. Hearing it, the detective says our people are taking Francis for a huge experiment. The detective is talking about the incident when a police officer shot Francis, but the detective doesn't know Francis Barrison is still alive. Later, Cletus ends a shop owner in his shop. He also discovers the secret location while hacking the computer. The asylum where Francis was kept. Coming into the asylum, he ends the doctors. Later, he comes to meet Francis. They become happy seeing each other. Here, Cletus makes Carnage meets with Francis. They were happy after meeting and escaping through a car. Now the police were behind them, but who would stay constant in front of Carnage? Carnage emerges and picks and throws police cars. It ends all the police officers. Venom comes to the shopkeeper while making another body its host. It asks for food and chocolates because it was hungry for many days after leaving Eddie. Eddie was in police custody. The police were considering Eddie behind yesterday night's attack, because they found many dead bodies near Eddie's house as well. The detective asks Eddie to tell the truth. Eddie says, I will not tell you anything until I make a phone call. Eddie calls Anne. After his call, Anne comes to meet Eddie with the doctor. Meeting her, Eddie tells Anne Cletus is behind all the incidents that happened in the city, because an unknown power attacking everyone has created a new symbiote. Eddie tells, now I am not with Venom, and goes and search for Venom. Only Venom can defeat Carnage. Anne knows that the shopkeeper knows about Venom. She goes and asks her, have you seen Venom? But Venom was hiding inside the shopkeeper's body. It says to Anne, I am angry at Eddie at this time and requests Venom that Eddie needs your help. Go and help him. Hearing this, Venom agrees to meet Eddie. Cletus and Francis were wandering in the city while spreading destruction. Carnage says while coming out of Cletus's body, my next prey is Venom. It means Eddie. Later, Venom and Ann are shown and they come to meet Eddie. They somehow escape from there. Venom asks Eddie to apologize on the way. Eddie finally apologizes to Venom. The detective was going somewhere but he meets Cletus on the way. He shoots at Cletus while getting off the car. Carnage comes out of his body and holds the detective. Frances finds Ann's ring when she reaches Eddie's house. She leaves while taking the ring from there. Before leaving, she also finds Ann's picture. With its help she holds Ann. She says, "Do come to our wedding." Later, the doctor says to Eddie on call that some people have taken Ann from here. Cletus and Frances are shown getting married. The detective was also there who was made a prisoner before some time. They were getting married. Venom also arrives, as Carnage comes out of Cletus's body sees it there. Venom becomes scared seeing it and again moves back into Eddie's body. Eddie asks Venom, "What is the problem? Why are you not coming out?" Venom says it is the Carnage. It is clever and powerful as well. Eddie says to Venom, "Just come out and eat whom you want to eat. I will not stop you." Venom comes out on a full speed after hearing this. A great fight begins between two warriors. They try to defeat each other. They were also trying to be dominant on each other. Carnage was dominant on Venom. It kept hitting it. Carnage was also conversing with Frances in the interim. Frances has vocal powers, so she was shouting loudly. Carnage was facing a problem due to it. We know the extreme levels heat and symbiote couldn't bear sonic powers. Getting a chance from it, the doctor sprinkles petrol on Carnage. There was a huge clock tower, it starts striking. Hearing the clock tower's voice, both symbiotes leave their hosts' bodies. As the voice stops, the symbiotes again go to their hosts' bodies. Later, Carnage moves to a building's top with Ann. But until now many stones have been fallen on Venom's body. It couldn't reach there. It says to Eddie, "We couldn't win this war this time. Carnage is more powerful than me." Carnage holds Frances and asks her to shut her mouth, because her sonic powers were irritating Carnage. Carnage holds her tightly, that's why Frances doesn't feel like breathing. She falls there, and seeing this, Cletus becomes furious. He asks Carnage to leave his body. But now because Carnage has control over Cletus's body, it doesn't let him separate from it. Venom was also seeing this whole scene. It says to Eddie, "Cletus's body isn't in Carnage's control." Eddie says after hearing this, "Yes, only we are a perfect match. Who can be a perfect match except for us?" Venom becomes excited to win. It challenges to Carnage. They reach a height. There was Ann in Carnage's hand and Venom has a rod in its hand. It stabs the rod in Carnage's head, and falls to the ground due to it. Venom saves her from reaching there at the exact time. Meanwhile, Carnage reaches there and stabbing it spikes inside it. The symbiotes were talking to each other. They were saying, "One has to die between both of us." Venom also says the best dialogue of this movie to Carnage. "Venom, let there be carnage." Meanwhile, Frances awakes. Venom asks her to make the sonic sound. Carnage arrives and pushes her. Frances shouts while falling down. That's why because of the sonic power the walls start breaking. Due to the loud voice, the symbiotes get separated from their hosts' bodies. The huge clock tower was falling from there. Frances was laying downside. Venom again arrives and saves Eddie, Ann, Frances, and the doctor. Carnage has been separated from Cletus's body completely. Carnage again tries to move in Cletus's body. Venom arrives and eats it. Later, Venom holds Cletus. Venom ends Cletus. Meanwhile, the police arrive and remove all of the dangers. Eddie asks the doctor to take Ann with him. The detective is shown saved in that incident. Venom and Eddie are shown sitting near a shore. Later, the scene shifts to a room where Eddie was sleeping on the bed. "Should we keep secrets from each other?" Venom asks. Eddie says everything has a past. Venom says, "I want to tell you something. But if I tell you, your brain will explode. There are many things I know and want to tell you. These things are difficult to understand." Eddie thinks maybe it will tell him about its symbiote. Meanwhile, the television begins to flicker and the surroundings begin to change. Eddie believes Venom is doing all of this. But Venom claims, "I am not doing it myself." Meanwhile, a bright golden light shines from the front. Venom later appears in Spider-Man's universe. It implies that Venom is now a part of Spider-Man's universe. With this suspense, the film comes to a close.